Our show is about bringing the best practices in education to inspire, connect, and empower all educators by providing practical tips that can be used in the everyday school setting.
Hello, and welcome to Coach Me If You Can. I am your host, Kristie Wurglitz, and Nicole Burke here with me today. And we have the pleasure of talking with Paula Kluth. My background is in teaching special education students with a range of needs in life skills, social-emotional, and instructional areas.
And I'm Nicole Burke. This is my first year as a district coach at NSSEO. And my background is in teaching students with social and emotional needs.
Paula Kluth is a consultant, an author, an advocate, and an independent scholar who works with educators and families to ensure that inclusive practices are identified in order to create those positive and engaging learning students for all students.
She also started her journey as a special education teacher and inclusive facilitator. She specializes in differentiating strategies in inclusive schooling.
Hi, Paula. Thanks so much for joining on the Coach Me If You Can podcast. We are so thrilled that you are here with us today. Do you mind just taking some time to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became inspired to begin working so closely with inclusive practices?
I would love to. And thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be on the podcast. I started working in inclusive schools. My very first job was in an inclusive school. But I also did student teaching in inclusive schools because I came out of a program. I went to the University of Wisconsin. We had a federal grant to look not only at inclusive education, but to look at inclusive education as it relates to kids with complex support needs. That was something I was already seeking when I was looking for a job. But even, taking a few steps back, I would say the reason I got really interested is because in my last year of high school, the school that I went to engaged in, a practice to bring students back to their home school. So in my senior year, I'm 51. So this was in the 1980s. My high school brought a handful of kids to my high school. These kids would have been in, a school just for kids with disabilities. They came into our high school, and the teacher, her name's Mary Durgener, I always talk about her, was obviously incredibly progressive. And even though inclusion wasn't happening, she decided to do her own thing. She knew about it. Of course, obviously, she was aware of the federal law. It wasn't happening quickly enough for her. And so she just started literally tapping kids on the shoulder and saying, where are you going after school? When do you work in the school store? And, do you need any help? And when do you go out to lunch? And do you have any room in your car? And she was incredible. And I think that's a really good message for teachers is there's an awful lot of things that we need to do that require tons of planning. But a lot of what makes a school inclusive is doing something. Sometimes it's just doing something in the spur of the moment. It's asking a question. It's getting kids together. It's talking to a colleague. It's having lunch with somebody. She was masterful, and she is my hero, and she is my role model. And I'm still in touch with her today.
What a great story and connection. What do you think is one thing that you hope our listeners get out of today?
For any kind of professional development, I always say, pick one thing. What is something that you can do? It's great to learn something that you didn't know before, but I would say, especially in a year like this, pick just one thing that's actionable. Think something that you can do immediately, a conversation you can have right away, a connection that you can make, a resource you can grab. Pick something and then do something with it.
That's really great advice. I know all the teachers that we're working with now are really just having a hard start to the school year. So I appreciate you saying that. I actually attended your co-teaching workshop prior to COVID. And so I was just wondering, in thinking about this school year, if you had to choose your top 3 co-teaching strategies, which ones would you suggest for teachers who are starting out the new school year, and why?
always hard to pick your favorites. It's like picking your favorite children, but I would probably pick 3 things that anybody could do, engage in with any partner, even without a full co-teaching relationship that's been instituted. So the first one I would say is try some role sharing with somebody. And again, you don't have to have an adopted co-teaching program to do any of this. You could perhaps that you're a special ed teacher and you're in a general ed teacher's classroom for a portion of your day, even an hour of your day, and just working on a little bit of role sharing. Like, hey, could I actually do the morning meeting once a week, working out with your general ed teacher where they might get to work in small groups in ways that they typically can't, so that you can take over part of the general education, sort of the, meeting up the lesson. So I would look for some kind of, what's one way that you can role share with somebody, do something that you haven't done before. And that includes if you're an occupational therapist, have you ever been able to lead a lesson? If you're a speech pathologist, have you ever been able to run a reading group? So look for something new. The second thing I would say is work in some creative way with your paraprofessionals. Is there a way to institute some collaborations that might rising tide all ships, sort of create more inclusivity in your spaces? And so that might be some role sharing or role shifting. It might be that we are involving our paraprofessionals in some conversations in new ways. And it might be looking for some co-teaching moments. So for example, if you're somebody that's saying, we don't do co-teaching at my school, there is a paraprofessional in my classroom, but I don't have any, I'm not working with any other certified teachers. It's true that co-teaching is, the definition of co-teaching is 2 certified teachers working together to deliver instruction and plan instruction. But there are some ways to collaborate creatively to make the most of that partnership as well. So let's just say that, that you are instituting a station teaching model, and perhaps a paraprofessional could be facilitating and kind of, doing check-ins with students with disabilities, but also helping to facilitate students as they rotate through your stations, while you are then able to stay at a single station as a general ed teacher and actually teach a lesson to every group that comes through. And you might even have moments in the classroom where you are the one teaching, say as a general ed classroom teacher, and perhaps your paraprofessional comes forward to lead students in community builders or in brain breaks, so that you can check in with individual students with or without disabilities. So just think creatively, like how could paraeducators, and I know many do, work beyond, individually supporting students and things like that. And then another thing I think can be really fruitful is really think about how you can lean into your related service provider relationships. There's so many individuals who never truly become part of classrooms. And I know so many related services folks that would love to do so. They would love to design more curriculum. I know so many occupational therapists that I'd get me into that writing curriculum. I would work with all first graders on writing goals. I would love to be consulted about getting kids up and moving and how I could maybe be a resource in that classroom for helping kids to regulate. So really think about, are there, even if it's not, again, every single week or, of course, every single day, how can we make more out of those relationships so that I always say, like, you want 100% of the adults in the building to really be supporting and educating 100% of the kids in the building in as many ways as you can imagine.
I love that you said to use the staff that you do have in connecting with all of the kids, in connecting with all of your lessons, and just integrating them fully into the classroom. That's really great advice.
And I love your term too, collaborate creativity. I love that. That's such a great way to put that.
Yeah, well, I think sometimes, we have to remember that everything, especially with co-teaching, that the number one thing we hear is like, just because that model hasn't been adopted formally in your school or district, it doesn't mean that there aren't so many ways to come together to meet the needs of a wide range of kids. And I would say that in many cases where folks are doing some co-teaching or some co-planning, there probably isn't a formal model, that's been adopted. Most folks are not bell to bell, second grade teachers that are together all day. They're looking for these little, as you say, creative opportunities. I think that's true.
So we know that some of your core values are that we want all of our students to be an expert in their own life. We want them to have those opportunities to learn and grow. And we really want to provide our students with those meaningful opportunities and that purpose just to thrive. So with that said, how can a district or even a school or a team ensure that all of the classrooms embody that value? And if they aren't already, then how do we promote those changes and instill this within our school and our community?
To create ideology around inclusion in a classroom or a school, we have to have lots of conversations about it. I wrote a book called Don't We Already Do Inclusion? And the title is kind of funny. It's kind of meant to be funny, but I think that goes to the question, right? Which is that a lot of folks say, well, yeah, we do that already. So you have to have lots of conversations about, do you mean, like Nicole might mean one thing when she's talking about inclusion, and then I might mean something else, when I'm talking about inclusion. So we have to keep having conversations about what exactly do you mean by that? And I always quote Nike. Nike used to have a campaign. Maybe this is really old campaign now, but the tagline was, there's no finish line. And that's true of inclusion. It's not like it's, we're all of a sudden we're done. We always have new folks coming into the buildings, new faculty, new staff. So we're always having to sort of talk about what is our definition. When new technologies come in, new understandings of inclusion, even new research is illuminating. So we always have to be clarifying, what do those values mean? Because you may think we've arrived and I might think we're just starting to nibble around the corners, like we're not even close, right? So that's a big deal, I think, is always having conversations about what does it mean? And I always talk about what is possible. What was possible 10 years ago is very different than what's possible today. There's so many new opportunities, not only in technology and in creating adaptations for folks, but even socially. This is going a little far afield, but when I was teaching, there was no such thing as, we weren't talking about kids with a whole host of identities and needs getting access to college. But now through Think College, and a lot of folks, if you don't know about Think College, check out that website. Think College is an organization that for quite a few years now has been working with universities, community colleges to try to give students a whole range of opportunities to learn once they leave K-12 education. And so we're seeing kids with autism, Down syndrome, multiple disabilities, complex support needs accessing universities and colleges in all kinds of interesting ways. So that all of that matters. And so the conversation has to kind of evolve as well. The other thing I would say is that there has to be a lot of holding up of our local examples, a social science standpoint, local, meaning that like what's happening here, what are we doing? Who are our examples of inclusion? And we need to talk about our own practice and sort of let people brag and, sort of illuminate what's happening here. And I think sometimes that's hard to do because teachers aren't always great at, bragging. It's always like, if you say like, you're doing such a great job with this kid, they're like, well, he's a great kid. I'm like, well, I'm sure he is, but you're doing you're doing something really amazing. I think that's really important to talk about how our own practices evolve. And I hope social media will change that. I hope that teachers being able to share things. Teachers post on Twitter and Instagram, and there's a lot of internal resources and having a blog or website for your classroom, where there's more being shared now, where we can show what inclusion is. And I think that's really helpful.
Yeah. So just having everyone be able to share their perspective of what inclusion is and just talking about it is so important.
I also think leadership in our schools has to be very clear. We have to keep the conversation going, but ultimately leadership has to be the one to say, anyone in leadership has to say, this is a core value. This is the work that
correct.
We do,
yep.
And so, so we have to keep helping folks understand why we're doing, why we do this,
right? And
to understand why this definition or this understanding of inclusion needs to evolve.
I agree with you. I think the title of your book, aren't we already doing that? Like some schools we're in think that they are, but it looks very different.
Right.
The more that you talk to people. So I agree. It's more of a top-down approach, and that this is our value of our school, and here's how we carry it out.
Mm-hmm.
In thinking about just this past year and the pandemic, in what ways has that affected your work? What things have you learned? And how has this changed some of your previous beliefs, if at all?
Well, the pandemic changed my work a lot. of course, because I am going into a school next week to do some work with kids, which is really exciting. Yay. But it's the
Get
first
back
one.
in there.
Yep.
But my response was, I'm a writer. I really think and organize through writing. I just started writing a book. I wrote a book last year called All In, which is about virtual inclusion. And I was writing as I was learning. And I love collaboration. Almost all my books are co-written. So I just started calling. I was literally looking at TikTok and finding teachers who were doing inventive things and contacting those teachers and saying, do you want to write something with me? So I ended up with like a dozen collaborators. I found folks on social media. I found old friends that were doing things. I called my most progressive researcher friends. And, every chapter I wrote with somebody new and just said, how are we going to, what is virtual inclusion? Can we even do this? And of course, I found all kinds of lovely examples. So there's a parent who talked about collaborating with her son's teacher. There was a chapter of a biology teacher who was learning TikTok so that she could, her students, where they lived, and teach the content in a way that would be sort of in a universally designed way. I learned how to create videos from a local educator here in my area, and he was doing instructional videos as a music teacher. I have a chapter on working with paraprofessionals in a virtual setting, and I worked with an administrator on that. And, I worked with a parent, actually a mom and a dad, about how they worked with their own child who has Down syndrome to establish and support an inclusive guitar club at the high school, and how they got the teacher involved and other kids involved. So
that's
the pandemic. Yeah, it was to say it was a learning experience,
Yeah.
But that was the thing for me was I always, since I come from a background of significant disability, or what we would call, complex support needs today, I had always felt, and I had taught every grade level. I'm K-12 certified. I taught at the university level. I've been an inclusion facilitator and a job coach. I always felt like whatever I was walking into, I knew how to do that. Even if I hadn't done it for 10 years, like I could always answer to folks who said, well, you've never seen a kid like this. And chances are I have. But I had never taught virtually, certainly not included kids virtually. So it was very humbling. And I thought, if I'm going to try to help anybody, I have to figure it out first. So that was really helpful. And I wouldn't say necessarily that it changed how I felt, but it was definitely a learning and an exciting one, was that I thought it was so fascinating that for the first time, parents would get to see the whole school day. Now,
right.
Granted, it doesn't look the same. Mm-hmm. Parents were coming up with so many awesome ideas, like, oh my gosh, I see how fatigued my child is in the morning, but then I saw when he got to the second period, like he really perks up. So maybe we should think about his rescheduling middle school, what he does first. Or like I noticed when he's with partners, and he does so much better when he was with his peer tutor. So all of a sudden you have parents that saw all this learning. I mean, they didn't ask for it or wanted it, but they got it. And then likewise, that I was just fascinated by the teachers seeing into homes. I have one friend, she's a high school teacher, and she said, I can't imagine this year teaching without Abuela, who was the grandma that came to class. And she said, I'm going to miss her so much, like she was there all the time. And that we saw in the people, the dog and the little ways that kids interact with siblings and what the home is like, and that post. And so all of that can be used for IEPs. It can be used in conversations in our relationships. And I hope that it will be. And I think a takeaway is, how do we maintain that sort of really interesting sort of level of partnership and insight as we go forward, and really, bring out some of the value of that. I think that was pretty astounding.
Yeah. So a lot of that home to school relationships have grown from that. And a lot of our schools and teachers and classrooms got to learn so much more about their students that maybe they wouldn't have learned if they were back in school.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much for everything that you have shared with us today. I think one of my biggest takeaways was really just that collaborative creativity. And then I love how you said too, like there's no finish line. So we should constantly be having that discussion about inclusion. There's always new staff, new research, new things going on. There's always a new understanding. So really just keeping that conversation ongoing and never just putting it to an end and just continuously talking about it. Love that. Nicole, how about you?
Nike's slogan used to be there's no finish line, and now it's just do it.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about that when you were talking about inclusion. We have to have those conversations, even if they're hard, with everyone in our building. And I appreciate you talking about role sharing, because it can't always fall on the teacher. There's a lot of work there. There's a lot of needs, and every child is different in the way that we support them. So utilizing your parapros related service, I really appreciated you saying that. And how do we help integrate them into our lessons? And so just for the benefit of all kids, not just our students who really struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
And then before we get into our rapid fire questions, we have one last question for you. What is something that empowers or inspires or maybe connects you?
Well, I would say certainly personally and professionally, I'm an avid reader, and I love connecting and socializing and things like that. So something in the last 5 years that's been really great is I've been learning so much from social media. And in particular, I follow a lot of accounts of individuals who are advocates, self-advocates, parents. You used to have to read a whole book, to learn some of these insights. And now it's like, in a sentence, I'm learning something every day. There's a lot of, there's a hashtag on Twitter or on social media, hashtag actually autistic. And so you get all these insights from parents and folks who are in the workforce and authors and educators who are giving free advice to us, which is so generous and helping us to learn and grow and do this work in the right way. So I'm super grateful for those individuals and how accessible learning now is. And we can learn right from experts, folks that experience disability themselves every single day.
All right. So now we're going to get down to our rapid fire questions. Dun, dun, dun. So just share the very first thing that comes to your mind. So what is something new that you have recently learned?
Oh, I learned to use a green screen
Nice.
because when I was writing the book, the virtual inclusion book, I bought one, but then never learned it because one of my co-authors was like, talking about that. And then I was like, okay, it's sitting in the corner and I'm going to take my own advice. And so I learned it and it's been really fun.
What's your favorite background for that?
I've been experimenting with like different countries, like trying to pretend that I'm at different places. Maybe it's just because I haven't traveled. But
You need a vacation.
I think I'd like a beach background right now.
Yeah, beach, right. We need that.
Who was your favorite teacher or educator growing up? I think you talked about one.
Yeah, probably Mary Durgener. I mean, and here's a great lesson for all of us is that Mary Durgener was not supposed to be my teacher. Her title was for kids with low incidence, whatever her title would have been. And she's a special ed teacher. And I was kind of a vulnerable, in high school, I had a lot going on. I had a loss in my family. So it was like, I really needed that personal attention. And so that's why we go back to 100% of the adults in any school are there for 100% of the kids. And she just took that so seriously. I feel like she invented it, at least as far as I'm concerned in my own life. She was the first teacher sort of that I had that wasn't intended for me. And she had just such a powerful impact. Yeah, be like Mary. Maybe I should get what would Mary Durgener do? I should have a
should have a sign.
Yes.
But yeah, we're all there. All the caring adults in every school are there for all the kids.
Yep. So I know you said you're an avid reader. So what book are you currently reading? Or if you're going to be writing another book, I'd like to hear about that too.
Oh, I am writing book. Well, I'm reading There. I think it's his first name, Tommy Orange, which is I think a debut novel, and it's really stunning. I just finished Chasten Buttigieg. I can't say that. Chasten Buttigieg's memoir, which I really had wanted to read. I Have Something to Tell You, which is kind of his coming out story. And I think he in part wrote it for young people, but as a teacher, I could not wait to get my hands on it. I got it when it came out, just finally finished it. It's great. Oh, I'm listening to Uniquely Human by Barry Prezant, my colleague, because I started it. I never finished the last bit. So I'm listening to that now. And I'm writing a book. I'm rewriting. I'm on the next edition of You're Gonna Love This Kid. So that's in my head.
Ooh.
And then I am writing a book on active learning.
Oh, sounds exciting.
Yeah.
Don't hold your breath.
Can't wait for those to come out.
Yeah. So there's a lot of projects, so it might be a while.
Yeah. No, that's okay. What is the best advice you have for an educator?
I feel like I should still just do it, but and it really, honestly, it's a takeoff on that. This is what I tell because I'm a special ed teacher. So I know there'd be slightly different advice I might give to a general ed teacher, but I think this can work a couple different ways. Mm-hmm. And the phrase I always tell teachers in consultations is I have them practice this phrase. And the phrase is, can I try something? So I have them say that with me. Can I try something? And the reason I think that's powerful is because I have been in so many general ed classrooms as a special ed teacher, high school, middle school, elementary school, where I maybe didn't feel like I knew what to do, or I maybe wasn't always expected to co-teach, but I wanted to co-teach something. Or way back in the day when I was starting, it was like, I have an idea, or I would say, could you maybe do this so that Bobby could use his augmentative communication device? And maybe that was honored, maybe it wasn't, or maybe it wasn't understood. So I got really good at saying, can I try something? So instead of saying, will you do this?
Right.
I would say, can I try something? Now I'm vulnerable. Yeah. And believe me, I have so many stories about falling on my face. Hilarious. Mm-hmm. And thank goodness I was very lucky that my general ed colleagues would have a good laugh, make fun of me in a nice, lighthearted way. Mm-hmm. I didn't really handle those 37 sixth graders very well. Let me show you something, but I appreciate the effort. Now let's work together on what we're going to try here next. What can I try something? I think that's incredibly powerful. If you really want to, you want them to try maybe a more collaborative kind of lesson. So instead of saying this would really behoove these kids to say, could I plan a lesson? Could I try something? Could I lead the lesson? I've never been turned down. And the other way I think that works great for all teachers is, let's say you want to co-teach. Let's say you'd like to, you think a lot of the kids that are on your caseload should be included and they don't have the minutes. And it's like going to the principal and saying, could we try something? Could we try co-teaching these 2 hours of the day? Could we try bringing him in for A, B, and C? And, I don't want to leapfrog over the public law, but again, with the permission of families and really having this conversation about what might be appropriate for a student, go in there. And my administrator would always say, don't come to me complaining all the time. Come to me and with your idea. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I think we should be engaged in, these extracurriculars should be more inclusive. Can we try something? Mm-hmm. And oftentimes please don't mistake that. I feel like school leaders have a responsibility to lead in those areas, but sometimes by being the one to come in there and just poke a little bit and put that forward, that can start the conversation. And of course, teachers should be getting support for that. I don't mean to say that you're on your own and you should be the one shepherding all of this, but the initial way in by kind of saying, I have an idea, can often be maybe a little bit, can kind of grease the wheels more than saying, I wish this were happening.
Right. It doesn't hurt to try something new.
And sometimes it's hard though, too. Sometimes it is hard to be vulnerable and say, can I try something? Mm-hmm. But being open-minded and trying that. All right. So most importantly, how can our listeners find you? Where can they go if they want to learn more information about you or find one of your books?
Well, I have a new site. It's called paulakluth.com. That's not going away. For people that already know to go to that site and to find me, they can go there. But I have a new site that's going to be kind of much more resource rich and much more of a general resource for folks, with lots of video and articles and links. And tip of the day will still be there. It's called inclusionrules.com. And all the resources from the old site will be on the new site, and then more as well. So we'll have, we're kind of building it as we go. I have all my course offerings. So if there's an event going on or something like that, all of that's usually on the front page. I'm on social media as well, but the site will kind of let you know. One-stop shop is probably Inclusion Rules, but I'm not great at Instagram. I'm trying to learn it, but I'm there, but I'm not great at it. But of course, I'm on Twitter a lot, and I have a really lovely Facebook community as well. folks that really try to help each other out. So yeah, so definitely join me there if that's already a place that you hang out.
Awesome. I will be checking out your new website. Inclusion.
Oh, good. Yes, come on over.
And we'll include both of those in our show notes too. So our audience can also have access to that.
Yeah, it's got the name is kind of cutesy, Inclusion Rules. And you'll also see a picture of me fanning out some rulers.
Oh, wow.
Clever.
If you weren't excited before.
So clever.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We were so excited to talk to you, and we have so many takeaways from today. So thank you so much.
Yeah, we really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. I'm really, really excited to be able to share, especially in a time when we are still a little bit, kind of feeling apart from one another. So it's really fun to come together and connect with creative colleagues. So thanks to both of you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Any chance we can get to talk to Paula Kluth, we're there.
Right back at you.
It's an honor.
Right back at you.
An honor.
Thank you for listening. Join us in 2 weeks for another episode of Coach Me If You Can.